Hello and welcome to Mrs. Law's class. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to use the square root principle to solve questions that involve a square. So when you have a quadratic equation and it's in this form, ax squared plus bx plus c, a doesn't equal 0, but b does, then you're only going to have an ax squared term and a c term. So we can solve these by isolating the squared term and then taking the square root of both sides. So let's take a look at this. All right, so in this first one, we have x squared equals 49. So a very basic one here. So what we can do is we're going to square root both sides. And when we square root both sides, we have to remember that x can equal the plus or minus of the number. So then in this case, it will be plus or minus 7. And the reason for this is 7 times 7 is 49, but negative 7 times negative 7 is also equal to 49. All right, in the second one, we need to isolate the square term. So we need to move all the constant numbers to the other side. So we're going to move the plus 1 to the right. So we get 121. We're going to divide both sides by 4. So we have x squared equals 121 divided by 4. And then now we're going to square root both sides again. And don't forget when we do that, we put the plus or minus right away. So actually what I'll do is I'll go back and put the plus or minus on the other one as well. So now we have x equals plus or minus, and the square root of 121 is 11, and the square root of 4 is 2. So we have plus or minus 11 over 2. All right, in the second one, in the third one, we are going to first actually get rid of the denominator. So the LCD in this case is 2. That's the lowest common denominator. So we're going to multiply both sides by 2 so we can get rid of the fraction. So 2 times a half will give me x squared. 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. And then 5 over 2 times 2 is just 5. So now we have something that looks a lot nicer with no fractions. Add 4 to both sides. And we get x squared equals 9. Square root both sides. And then put the plus or minus. And we have x equals plus or minus 3. If you look at these first 3 questions, you'll notice that the squared term is just a monomial. So we have x squared. The second one only is also x squared. And so is the third one, x squared. So the next 3 that we're going to take a look at, you'll notice that the square term is actually a binomial. So here we have x plus 2 all squared. Now the square term is already isolated, so we can still square root both sides like we did before. And notice carefully that the square term is covering the entire bracket. So the x plus 2 is in brackets. So we're going to plus or minus when we square root. So we're going to have x plus 2 equals plus or minus 9. We're going to subtract 2 to both sides. So now we have negative 2 plus or minus 9. So notice the plus or minus belongs to the 9. And we're going to solve these 2 little equations. So we have x is equal to negative 2 minus 9. And we also have x equals negative 2 plus 9. So in the first one, we're going to have negative 11. And then in the second one, negative 2 plus 9 is 7. So unlike the first 3 questions, these numbers are not the same. Okay, so they're not plus or minus the single number. So this one's negative 11 and 7. Now you actually don't need to show the step here if you can do the math in your head. So you can go negative 2 minus 9, that gives negative 11. And then negative 2 plus 9 is 7. All right, let's take a look at the next one. So again, the binomial is already squared all by itself. So we can square root both sides. And when we do that, we're going to put the plus or minus. So we have x minus a half. And then plus or minus. And we can't square root 5, so we're going to put square root 5. But we can square root the 9, so that's going to be 3. Move the half over by adding it to the other side. So we have half plus or minus root 5 over 3. Now, to make it look nicer, if you like, we can also get the common denominator so we can join these two fractions together. So we're going to times the top and bottom by 3 for the first fraction, and then the second fraction we're going to times the top and bottom by 2. So here we have x equals 3 plus or minus 2 root 5, and then all over 6, which is my lowest common denominator. All right, in the last one here, we can see there is a 2 that's not part of the squared. So what we're going to do is we're going to divide by 2 on both sides first. So we have x minus 3 all squared equals 20. Now we're going to square root both sides. And when we do that, we're going to put plus or minus. And you know what? I'll go back to these ones to make these ones purple as well, so that it's consistent with the other ones. Okay, so now we have x minus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 20. And we're going to add 3 to both sides. So now we have x equals 3 plus or minus. And now actually I'm going to simplify the square root 20. So we know that square root 20 is the square root of 4 times the square root of 5. So this is going to be 2 times the square root of 5, because square root of 4 is 2. And that's how we apply the square root principle to solve questions that have the square isolated.